The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents I Wish, I Wish, I Wish. I wish you all the best. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, I'm the type of person who will normally say, I don't have any regrets. Everything that's happened in my life led to who I am. And while I don't think I'm perfect, I'm kind of fond of who I am. And mistakes I've made in the past have been there so that I could learn and have helped build who I am now. I've learned and grown, and I couldn't be who I am without the good and the bad things from the past. But the truth is, I do have regrets in a couple of different contexts. I don't regret the fact that I was indoctrinated into Christianity. If I hadn't been, I couldn't do what I'm doing now to potentially help people find the mistakes in their thinking as well. But I do have regrets in a couple of different contexts. One is that essentially, I wish that I would have been able to learn a particular lesson without having experienced the negative experiences that taught me that lesson. And not only that for myself, but in many cases where I've done something that has upset someone else. For example, if I said something incredibly harsh to someone, called them a name in my frustration, and I was actually wrong and unjustified in that, and it harmed them. Yes, I learned a lesson from it, and it helped me to not use that particular name or in that context again, but I caused harm to another person, and that is regrettable. And so, while I'm the type of person who says I don't have regrets, there have been many, many times in my life where something happened, and I would immediately say, oh man, I wish I hadn't done that, or I wish that hadn't happened. But we all know that wishes aren't real. You can rub on a lamp, you can toss a coin in a well, nothing happens. And so what good is it to sit around and say, oh, I wish, I wish, I wish. As a matter of fact, you might just be wasting your life, wishing for a different life, when that just can't happen. The problem is, how do we know that we haven't been granted wishes? I'm sure at some point, or I would imagine for most of you, at some point in your life, you would say, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. But how do you know that you weren't granted wishes? How do you know that, like, everybody isn't born with one wish and you used yours? Or there were 3 wishes and you used yours, or 25, or 2,500, or 25,000, or maybe an unlimited number of wishes. How do you know that you haven't been making wishes and having them granted? I'm not sure. I thought about this for a while, and I've had conversations with people. How do you know that the wishing well doesn't work, or that I haven't granted you wishes? Maybe I'm magical, and every time you wish, I grant your wish. Or that a wishing fairy has granted your wish. Well, you might say, hang on, I keep saying I wish and it clearly doesn't happen, and that shows that wishes aren't granted. And I would agree with you that given the available information, that would appear to be the case. But what if you wish to undo something, and if it's properly undone, that means rewinding time back to that point, and then the event that you wished away doesn't happen, but you don't have any memory of it happening. For example, maybe when I got out of the car the other day with groceries, I actually dropped the bag and broke the bottles and mess everywhere all over the driveway, all because I'd been in too big of a hurry to get out of the car. I mention this because that almost happened. And maybe I wish I'd just slowed down for a minute and paused and look at what I was doing, and that wouldn't have happened. And when I made that wish, time was rewound to that point. I did what I wished I'd done, which is to pause a little bit, and then the event doesn't happen. I have no way of showing that that didn't happen. What are the rules for wishes? Maybe the failed wishes, where I wished for something and it didn't happen, weren't failures at all, but were only apparent failures because I didn't understand the rules for wishing. Maybe there were mistakes on my part where maybe I've used up all my wishes, or maybe I've used up all my wishes in a category. Or I wished for something to be undone, and then when it happened and was undone, it turned out that the consequences were much, much worse, and so I wished to go back and essentially undo that wish and to eliminate my options for wishing for that in the future. I wish we knew. Now, generally speaking, there are a number of principles within epistemology that would allow us to look at this sort of thing and say, yes, but the default, the null hypothesis, is that there's no connection between me wishing for something and that something happening. And I would agree. But the real issue here is one of falsifiability. I didn't just sit down and make a video about wishes because I wanted to talk about wishing. It's really one of falsifiability. And this is a subject that is important and is not as well understood as it should be. And that is, for any given proposition, do you have a way to show that it is false? I've been granted wishes is a proposition. We could show that it was plausible by showing a strong correlation between wishes and results. We could never show that it was true. We may not even have access to truth. At best, all we can do is talk about how strongly correlated a proposition is with the evidence, with the observations. This is one of the many problems, the problem of induction, the problems within scientific inquiry. Science doesn't make proclamations of truth. It doesn't say X is true. What it says is essentially, here's a model, here's a theory, here's the evidence for it, and all we can say is that the evidence strongly shows that this model is true or likely true, but we cannot confirm it with any sort of certainty, with absolute certainty. We can show that it's plausible if I said, I wish this happened, and it happened. I wish this happened, and it happened. You start building up a case for strong correlation. And if it turned out, if I said, I wish this would happen, and it didn't happen, that could be considered falsifiability. The problem is we don't know what the rules are for wishes. We don't know how anything could potentially work, so we're in the dark. How could we show that we haven't been granted wishes? I already gave examples where we might appear to think we haven't been granted wishes, but this could be the result of another wish. Like, I wish I'd never made that wish. I wish I could undo that wish. Or perhaps our wishes collide with other people's wishes. Like, I wish that Matt wasn't able to go back and undo that thing where he dropped the bottles all over the place. How is a proposition falsifiable? Well, Karl Popper proposed that within science, and this is partially related to the problem of demarcation, which we'll get to another time, that to tell the difference between science and pseudoscience, one of the key factors, if not the key factor, is whether or not a particular proposition is falsifiable. And by this, I mean in principle. And hopefully it's much stronger. Falsifiability is stronger if not only is it falsifiable in principle, there is some way to show that it's not true, but there's some way to show it that it's not true given our current understanding and methods. It means nothing to say that this is falsifiable when we have an invisibility cloak, or this is falsifiable when we build a fairy detector, because a fairy detector would show us that it wasn't a fairy, a wish-granting fairy. Falsifiability in principle is about how we could demonstrate that a particular proposition is in fact false. The classic example deals with the black swan fallacy. And so if we find a swan and it's white, and we find another swan and it's white, and we find another swan and it's white, and we keep doing this and we keep doing this, and all the swans that we find are white, it would be fallacious to say there are no black swans merely because we haven't found any yet. The proposition that there are no black swans is falsifiable because in principle, we could find a black swan, and that would demonstrate that the proposition is in fact false. A single black swan shows that the principle is false. And so that makes the proposition one that science can examine. I've talked before, and even recently, about the problem of demonstrating supernatural causation or causation from God, and that is largely because these things aren't really falsifiable. This is where I got to the I wish. Now, the tentative acceptance of a proposition exists only until such time as a falsifiable proposition has been shown to be false. And so, for example, you should reasonably accept the proposition there are no black swans, or all swans are white, because it's falsifiable by demonstrating any swan that's not white. And your confidence in that proposition that all swans are white should be proportional to the evidence. And so each time we're finding each additional white swan would potentially increase that, but you should only accept it tentatively and up until the point where it's falsified. Now, it's still a fallacy to say there are no black swans just because you haven't had any. But to say all the swans we found so far are white and we're expecting this trend to continue is a reasonable position because it is falsifiable, because it could be shown to be false and has not. And we're assuming there that there are actual attempts to show that it's false. It gives us a foundation for tentative acceptance of propositions, which is all we should ever do. I've said many times that I can't be absolutely certain about anything, right down to I can't be absolutely certain that I exist, but that gets to, the primacy of reason. I'm supremely confident that I exist, but that doesn't mean I'm absolutely certain. And so when we're talking about what we should accept, it is if you present a proposition and that proposition is in principle falsifiable and ideally falsifiable given our current abilities, and you show evidence in favor of that proposition, then we should reasonably accept that proposition, and our confidence in it should be proportional to the evidence for it. And we should give up that proposition the instant that the falsification event has actually occurred. Hopefully, by using wishes and talking about swans, maybe this gave you a little bit better look into falsifiability. One of my favorite quotes from David Hume is that the wise man proportions his confidence to the evidence. And if we bring it into the 21st century, let's just say that each individual should have a confidence level that is proportional to the evidence in favor of a falsifiable proposition. Hume, while he didn't talk about falsifiability specifically, included ideas along those lines in his epistemology. This ties into the problem of demarcation, which I mentioned earlier, which is how do we tell what things should qualify as science and scientific inquiry and what things should qualify as non-science or pseudoscience, etc. We'll take a look at that in another video because I'm specifically looking to address something that's come up in a number of different debates and discussions, including a recent call from Tangelo. And the question is this: is the evidence that you are rejecting more reliable than the evidence you are accepting? That is an aspect of evidence with regard to epistemology that I don't think gets addressed enough. But before we can get to it, we've got to learn about falsifiability and other things. Anyway, I wish you all the best. I don't necessarily have any significant regrets that I wish I could change in the sense that I've learned from them, but there are definitely things that I wish for the whole world. I just don't see any reason to think that wishes can come true, and I cannot take the proposition seriously because I don't know how to falsify it. I won't even say that it's unfalsifiable in principle, just that I'm not aware of any method to falsify it. And that's true for God and the supernatural and a bunch of other things. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.